Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Lynn and today I have a sublimation project for you. I'm going to make a little wine tumbler and the supplies I'll be using are my protective project mat, some heat-proof gloves, safety first of course. We've got some heat tape, some Artistry multi-purpose cleaner because I'll be using the iron-on ink stamp pad from Artistry in black, and then I'll be using the sublimation acrylic paints from Artistry in yellow, orange, brown, and green. Not shown here is the green that I'll be using. And for my design, I'll be using a clear stamp, photopolymer stamp from Not Too Shabby. And because we're making a tumbler, I've got the Artistry wrap. It's their heat wrap, and that's going to be what really holds our design tightly to our tumbler. Now, I want to tell you in advance that I'm going to show this footage, but I'm actually going to tell you how I did this the second time, which was much more successful. But I wanted to leave this footage in just to share with you what not to do, because I feel like sometimes that's just as valuable as seeing what you should do. And I'll show you the results from both this first attempt and as well my second attempt. So if you're gonna do a full wrap design, measuring the circumference of your tumbler with a ribbon is one way to kind of understand how long of a stretch of paper you'll need in order to create your design on. However, I knew that I wasn't going to do a full wrap design. So really, I didn't need to do this. And the second time that I made the tumbler with the same design and everything, instead of one long stretch of paper, I actually just cut two smaller panels. It ended up being about, 4 by 4 inches square is what I needed for this design. But the idea is that you don't really need a lot of that excess paper because it presents a challenge when you go to tape your design to your blank. And the reason is because this particular wine tumbler, it's not a straight one on the sides. They aren't straight. It's actually tapered quite a bit at the bottom, and then about a third of the way up, it kind of bulges out a little bit and tapers back a little bit as it comes up to the top. So with all of those curves and angles, having a lot of paper presents a little bit of a challenge because you really need to wrap this so that your design makes full solid contact with the blank. That's always the case with sublimation projects because when you apply heat to this, what happens is this solid paint is actually going to sublimate and go from a solid directly to a gas, skipping over the liquid phase. And when it becomes when it's in that gaseous state, it's just gonna kind of float around and it's gonna float and transfer to whatever it's touching. Now, if it's making solid contact with your blank, it's not gonna really go that far. It's just gonna go from the paper to your blank. But if this design is not squarely and firmly making 100% contact with the blank, then there might be a little bit of an air gap between the design and your blank, which means when it's in that gaseous state, the acrylic paint is going to just kind of float around and mosey its way from the paper to your blank, which means it may not end up being as crystal clear. You're going to get some ghosting. You might get some discoloration because it's going to sort of, just spread out a little bit instead of just going directly from paper to blank. Now, the reason why I am doing this and coloring it in right in my stamp positioning tool is because I really like using the acrylic paints when I know I want to mix some colors, maybe get some shadows, maybe get some blending from dark to light, from shadow to highlight. And I feel like the paints are going to blend much, much better than the markers, for example. And I feel like it's going to move a lot more easily across the paper than, say, painting with the iron-on ink pads, or the ink refills even, because those are a little bit more watery and the paints are a little bit more, they're a little bit more viscous. They have a little bit more body to them. But the thing is that when you're painting, because of that extra sort of, viscosity, it's also more opaque. And so as I'm painting, I'm covering up all of those stamped lines that the original clear stamp has, which provides a lot of detail, like the veins of the leaves, little creases and folds of the petals. And so by leaving this in my stamp positioning tool, coloring it in, and then overstamping, meaning stamping again, I can bring back the line detail that the stamp puts in. And it makes all the world of a difference because it has all of that really lovely, illustrator details, and it really crisps everything up again, because when I colored it in with my paints, it kind of, have some fuzzy, edges in the design where maybe sometimes I painted a little bit over the stamped line. Maybe I sometimes painted a little bit inside the stamp line, sometimes a little bit outside the stamp line. I think it's okay. It's a hand painted work, so it doesn't need to be perfect, but just by overstamping and stamping again in exactly the same position, it really does help to crisp up the design and make it very, very clear. Now, this step is very key because this is the point where I was saying you really want to make sure there aren't any air bubbles. Now, here I'm making just little snips in the paper where it curves, and really that's not enough. It would have been better to really cut this panel down to, just, maybe 3/4 of an inch or so away from the design, and really try to, get as little paper as really necessary so that it can, wrap around this curved tumbler much more easily without a lot of overlapping paper, because once you have that wrinkle, it means that there's air trapped under there. It's really when you can see like something very super smooth that there's not gonna be an air gap. Now, it's okay if you've got wrinkles where you don't have your design at all. But what you really want to strive for is making sure that where your design is, that it's super flat and that it is making very solid contact with your blank. And this isn't the time to be, conservative with your tape. You want to be generous with your tape to really make sure that it's well stuck down, that you don't have any air gaps, that you don't, for this, because it's not a full wrap design, meaning the design isn't 100%, over the edge to edge, top to bottom. It's a lot easier to wrap this, but you still have to kind of take care too. And I wasn't really, you can see it even now as I'm watching this on the replay. I can see where, I've got some wrinkles, where I've got some air bubbles. And so that's what I learned, is that sometimes it might even at the time that you're doing it look kind of smooth, but really you gotta strive for really super smooth. Any wrinkles anywhere, and it could actually move a little bit, that air. And so I didn't catch that as I was making this first one. So I put it into the transfer wrap and applied some heat to it with my heat gun in order to shrink it. And if you've got everything taped down really securely, that shrink film just really helps to keep everything tight and keep that design really secured to the blank. But if you've already got some air gaps in there, the shrink wrap isn't really going to save you. Because it's not going to shrink enough with enough pressure to really push any air out. So if there's some air gaps between your paper design and your blank, don't rely on the shrink wrap to help force that air out. You really need to make sure that when you're taping your design down, that it's really got no air underneath there. And so I put this into my Craft Express oven for 5 minutes at 350 degrees Fahrenheit. And while it's still warm, I like to take this shrink film off because it's much more malleable when it's warm. Once it's hard, once it's cooled, it gets hard and it's more difficult to actually peel off. And so I'm just going to quickly peel all of this off. But I'm going to be patient and I'm going to let this cool because, as I mentioned, if it's still warm and if any of that acrylic paint is still in its gaseous state, it still might move around a little bit. It still might create some ghosting. But if you let it cool so that it's at least just warm to the touch, or better still, room temperature, then you know that all of that paint has safely made it into the blank and it's not going to distort or anything. And of course, with all of this tape, it's so hard because it feels like it takes forever before you can finally see your design. But because I'm just using regular copy paper, I could tell that it did transfer because you can even see some of that paint come through. So this was very encouraging. There was a little bit of a spot. You can kind of see at the base of the flower where it meets the stem. There's a little bit of discoloration where the green is, and I think I had a little bit of a gap there, a little bit of an air bubble there. And so that's what it looks like when you don't have your design really firmly stuck down. You can see it's a little bit lighter there, and with that, it's not too bad. Because at least it's all confined to just that small area. But this one, you can see that curved, like those streaks. And that is a massive wrinkle, in my paper where there was an air gap. And because of that, not all of the paint transferred, and so it's a little bit lighter. It's a little fuzzy as well because whatever paint did transfer, it just kind of floated a little bit before settling. So, now here's my second one. Now you can see already there's a lot less paper. You can pretty well see that there aren't any wrinkles. Like, I really tried hard for there to not be any overlapping paper, and I just trimmed away as aggressively as possible. And here we go. It's time to reveal. This turned out so much better. You can see it's nice and crisp. All of the lines are nice and sharp. All of the color is very consistent. You don't see any fuzzy lines. You don't see discoloration or any distortion of the, design. And of course, this is the one where, I was really anxious for. So this turned out much, much better. And I love these huge florals. I love that we can take something from our paper crafting and turn it into like these fabulous, DIY gifts. And it's like having something that's, hand painted, but this is now a permanent part of this mug, and it's going to be so durable and long lasting. And that's what I love about sublimation, is that your designs are going to be permanent. It might take a couple of tries, but once you get the hang of it, you're going to be making some really fabulous, fabulous projects. I hope you enjoyed my video today, and until next time, happy crafting and have a fabulous day. Bye.